In recent years, much has been said among language researchers about the way in which humans acquire the ability to communicate among their relatives through a system of signs. Various theorists have tried to explain the origin of language based on their own language experiences, pointing out that communication ability is obtained by imitation of the patterns that the environment puts at our disposal, and the reinforcement, positive and negatives, that we receive from our relatives, as is the case of behaviorism. However, it is observed that children also emit words and grammatical structures that they have never heard during their speech development. And that leads us to think that it doesn't depend exclusively on input and reinforcement. Other theorists claim that the ability to communicate through language is innate, which means that it doesn't depend exclusively on the linguistic patterns that the environment provides to us, but also on a genetic ability inherited from our ancestors, as is the case of innatist theorists. These two currents of thought are both very old, and surprisingly, even in the classical period, these theories already have many adepts, and they already generated a debate between the schools of thought from that time, as is the case of the empirism of Aristotle and the innatism of Plato. But what is most surprising is that in spite of the few technological instruments that they had back in the days, the conclusions they reach are still taken into account by language researchers of modern times. At present, there is a tendency among language researchers to mix these two theories and the critical period theory when trying to explain the way languages are learned, because based on cases such as the Genny-Willis case, they realized that it's the stimuli of the environment and society what allow humans to develop their abilities, and this stimuli is necessary in the critical period because it is the moment in which the brain develops neural connections that allow us to develop communication skills. Now, the question we must ask ourselves is how can we apply these discoveries in the field of the study and teaching of second language acquisition, and what the evidence that generated the case of Genny-Willis tell us about the statements that are made in the book Myths and Misconceptions about Second Language Acquisition, What Every Teacher Needs to Unlearn, and the chapter 7 of the text, How Languages Are Learned.
Following the idea, it's important to make an emphasis on what the evidence tells us about the specific case of Genny-Willis in contrast to the statements found on the Myths and Misconceptions book, in which is mentioned the theory of the sensitive period by Jean Piaget as one that doesn't have any basis on the learning process of a language. However, Genny-Willis' case showed and confirmed his theory and how important is the external stimulation the interaction between the child and the things that he can observe, the things that he can perceive and manipulate towards the efficient cognitive development, as well as the language. And additionally to it, Lev Vygotsky concluded the same idea, adding that in a supportive interactive environment, children are able to advance to higher levels of knowledge and performance. Now, it's vital to mention that around the acquisition of a language or of a second language, the imitation process has an important function. But how? Each one of us, as learners, we do more than internalize a large list of imitated phrases, slangs, or vocabulary. Therefore, it is not only about absorbing information and repeating them, it's more about making it a systematic process, but on the practice, letting yourself understand how it works, allowing yourself and your brain to develop new ideas around it, taking the risks to try and expand your creativity. In the path of the acquisition of a language, we tend to look for different alternatives, for different strategies to polish it, right? But what happens when the best predictor of success seems to be motivation? First, let's take into account that the major components of motivation should be activation, persistence, and intensity. But in fact, motivation works as instance of happiness that leads you with ease to achieve something. Now, let's think about this. What do we do with today motivation if tomorrow ends as being a bad day? Most of the time, we quit the process because motivation is not enough, and there is where discipline takes place on the acquisition of a language. If we have discipline, we have a constant habit.
In response to all questions and theories about whether innate skills are enough or whether the act of socializing is essential to develop and acquire uh, in case of learning a second language, over the years we have realized that the construction of language in the human being is a product of both and that only one couldn't be effective. The multiple factors such as socialization, communication, motivation, and affections, if we apply them correctly to the child, certainly their communication skills will be great. As future teachers, it will be a challenge to take in account all these aspects when guiding apprentice on the right way, being the motivation the most important thing to achieve the target language. And on the other hand, there there exists in all human being a critical period of learning that needs linguistics stimulation and factors that have great impact on the brain as their socialization, communication, and affection from birth. That means that despite our innate capacities, the social context is decisive in developing language capacity. Uh, as human beings, we are instinctively social beings. We normally interact with other people to be able to live in society and always having the need to establish an emotional attachment with the closest people by receiving affection as a hug, a kiss, uh, learn to recognize and return a smile, uh, catch a laugh, cross looks, aspects that help us or correct social and emotional development. Finally, to reflect, don't be the father of Genie Wilds when we teach. When you teach a second language, each Each learner is a new word to know for us to give infinite, infinitive possibilities, and that is where our role of teacher must work a little bit more. But given how important we are at the moment to help build someone's language skills,